A few years ago, I started listening to this podcast. It's put out by the Ziegler Rabbinical School in Los Angeles. Their dean, Rabbi Bradley Artson, regularly holds Q&A sessions with the students. And the questions and the answers are really fascinating. They cover the spectrum of pressing issues facing the Jewish community, to questions of ritual and practice and Torah and rabbinic thought, and even things not directly connected to Jewish life, but about which students wanted to hear the esteemed rabbi's perspective. And this is the podcast. And I've come to thoroughly enjoy it, especially while sitting in traffic. But there was this episode from a few years ago with a question that stuck in my mind for whatever reason. Not so much the question as the answer. The student asked, is it possible to still live a meaningful Jewish life if I don't believe in God? It's a good question. Artson answered quickly, yes. And then he continued, saying, because if God is what I believe God to be, then God is beyond all possible comprehension. And if that's the case, then any language we use to talk about God is by definition metaphor. So if you're having trouble with this idea of God, pick another metaphor. I love the answer, and it's one that I thought about this week as I read our Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is called Chayei Sarah. It means the life of Sarah, although it begins with Sarah's death, and that's another sermon altogether. But in the narrative, in the portion, we see that following Sarah's death, Abraham wants to see to it that his son Isaac is properly married off. So he summons his servant, Eliezer, making him swear to bring Isaac a wife from the land of his birth, and not from among the Canaanites who were around them. So Eliezer sets out with 10 of Abraham's camels, and he comes to this well outside the city of Nahor. But before entering, Eliezer makes the camels kneel down outside the city at a time that the women were tending to draw water from the well. And he offers this prayer. He says, Eternal One, God of my master Abraham, please bring me luck today and do a kindness for my master. Here I am standing at the well, and the female townspeople are going forth to draw water. And the one to whom I'll say, tip your pitcher and let me drink, and who replies, drink and let me water your camels too. Let her be the one you've designated for your servant Isaac. That's how I'll know you've done a kindness for my master Abraham. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happens. A young woman came forward offering just these very things, and that was the beginning of Rebekah and Isaac. But I want to focus on this prayer that Eliezer offers, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. Eternal One, God of my master Abraham, Eliezer says, please bring me luck today. I say it's fascinating because there tend to be two opposite poles for how people might view God's role in the world. Option one, we live in a world in which God has absolute power, a world in which God reaches down and makes things happen. Good things happen to me because God made them happen to me, and bad things happen for the same reason. Option two, things happen by chance. There's no rhyme or reason, there's no divine intervention, and when good things happen in my life, it isn't because God loves me any more than God loves my neighbor. It's just because I happen to have good luck that day. And here, Eliezer is praying to God, invoking Adonai's name, apparently seeking divine intervention, asking God to make it happen a certain way. and asking for luck, calling it all luck. It's striking because this is a particularly modern and progressive theological approach in a very early section of the very first book of the Torah. Here, Eliezer is connecting with God amidst doubt or uncertainty of God's role in the world in the first place. It's a feeling to which many modern Jews, perhaps even some of us here in this room tonight, might be able to relate. There may be those among us who routinely pray for healing, as we just did a few moments ago, amid uncertainty of whether God actually causes illness in the first place or is capable of causing healing in others. There may be those among us who have prayed for strength for a devastated city, amid doubt that God caused the earthquake or the hurricane to begin with. And here in Eliezer, we see a model for true, deep, and meaningful connection with God amid all of these questions. What a beautiful model for so many, it means to be a modern Jew in the world. And in a sense, this is actually an early hint of the theological model presented in the story of Joseph, which we'll see in about 10 chapters in Genesis. As you may know, Joseph, Jacob's favorite son, is sent on a fantastical journey. He's sold into slavery by his brothers. He's thrown into an Egyptian prison. He's subsequently plucked out of that prison, and he rises to a position of high power in the Egyptian court. It's a story of rivalry and reconciliation and features many, many characters. But interestingly, there's one character that's absent from the cast list: God. In fact, this is the only major narrative in the Torah where God is not an active character. Other biblical figures spoke to God, God spoke to them, they had a relationship. God created a garden for Adam and Eve, gave specific instructions to Abraham. God fought with Jacob and appeared through a burning bush to Moses. But for Joseph, there was none of that. In fact, one of the only times God's name is even mentioned in that whole story is when Joseph's in prison. And the Torah says a few different times, Vayehi Adonai et Yosef, and God was with Joseph. That's it. No burning bush, no revelation, no big booming voice, just a subtle reminder that God was with him. It seems that what Eliezer and Joseph remind us is that, while some of us might find ourselves on one of the poles that I mentioned earlier, either seeing a world in which God is an active character causing events to take place, or a world made up by chance and luck, they remind us that it isn't a zero-sum game. That we can experience a world in which God perhaps isn't an active character, but still feel that God's presence alongside us. We can observe that we live in a world in which many things do happen by chance or luck, but still recognize something bigger than ourselves, something divine in it all. And we can connect with that presence through prayer and ritual, all while still questioning how that presence is manifested in the first place. And in those moments when God might not feel like an active character in our lives, when it might feel like things are happening with no rhyme or reason, and it all comes down to chance, may we learn from Eliezer, and may we learn from Joseph, and may we continue to seek God's presence even in the most minor moments of our lives. Shabbat Shalom.